Kia ora koutou. Welcome to our new format, and this week we're chatting to Brian Fallow, who is the former economics editor of the Herald and Herald columnist. Welcome, Brian.
How are you, Jeff?
Good, thanks. Good. So we're going to talk today about the emissions trading scheme. Of course, the consultation, the first round of consultation on that closes today. And Brian, I thought I'd start with just getting your thoughts on Jeanette Fitzsimons has come out and said that we should scrap the ETS and put a carbon charge, I think it's a nice word for a tax, in place.
Well, I think that's Green Party policy, or was going into the last election, and I always thought that it's a shame that Labor, that was their first idea in this field. I thought it's a pity they abandoned that, but I think that bus has left the station, so to speak. We've got an ETS, it's in a coma, it's not quite dead, but it's not doing very much. And the task now is to resuscitate it and render it fit for purpose.
And what do you mean by it's in a coma?
Well, I mean, first of all, it only applies to a minority of the country's emissions. Secondly, as you know, for most of the time it's been running, the carbon price has been almost zero. Emitters have been able to buy, I think the technical term is El Cheapo crap units from the rest of the world. Use them instead of the New Zealand units that the government has continued to pour out there. So the carbon price applying to that minority of emissions that attract a price has been virtually zero and has had no effect on behaviour.
Yeah. So let's take the first of those points now. First up, you're saying it only applies to the minority of the economy, so you're talking about agriculture there.
Well, agriculture's excluded, and they don't plan to include it in this review. I think that's a mistake. But even for the emissions-intensive, trade-exposed guys like TY and the Glenbrook steel mill and so on are heavily protected. They only face a carbon price for a small fraction of their emissions. And for the rest, the domestic energy consumers and drivers and so on, there's been this buy one, get one free deal where the oil companies and power companies only have to answer for every other tonne of emissions. That bit will almost certainly be scrapped.
Yeah, it looks like the government's going to get rid of that. But are you saying you'd bring in agriculture and scrap
well, I
the
don't see a case for treating agriculture different from any other emissions-intensive, trade-exposed sector. You might want to protect them to some extent, perhaps even a considerable extent, but there should be some incentive at the margin to look for ways of reducing their emissions. Now, the standard line you get from the politicians, there's nothing farmers can do in response to a carbon price except kill cows or something. It's nonsense. And one of the behaviours you're trying to affect here is land use decisions, and not having a carbon price applying to pastoral farming is a distortion there. And we might actually be better off right now if we'd had fewer dairy conversions and perhaps a bit more cropping, pork production or something instead, or more trees on hillsides and fewer sheep.
Yeah, I noticed today that Landcorp is expecting an $8 or $9 million loss, which given they made use of the El Cheapo credits you were talking about to cut down a lot of forest in the central Waikato and create dairy farms. I mean, what's your thoughts on that situation?
Well, I mean, New Zealand is answerable for all of its emissions, including the 8% that come from pastoral farming. If the people who are profiting, usually, from those emissions don't have to pay, then the taxpayer has to pay, and I call that a subsidy. Moreover, it's a subsidy that gets capitalised into land prices, so you're not necessarily doing the cockies any favours. The people who benefit from that are the people who sell the land, get an even bigger tax-free capital gain. The guy who buys it just gets a bigger mortgage, and I don't see what should be sacrosanct about that arrangement.
So, if the farmers aren't paying, we are. That's the bottom line. Okay. So moving away from land use now and back to your comments on the international side. So we've been sold. We've bought a lot, engaged in trade of a lot of fraudulent credits in the past. What do you think is the answer going forward to that situation?
Well, I mean, first of all, that hole has been plugged in the sense that as of the middle of last year, New Zealand emitters can no longer buy and use those units. The trouble is, it's been classic Gresham's law effect of bad money driving out good, that there are now, because these things have crowded out New Zealand units, the government's continued to issue them. There's a backlog, an overhang of 114 million New Zealand units out there,
wow.
which is roughly 5 years demand.
Right, okay.
And people own this, you know. And so one of the uncertainties going forward is what will the owners of these units do with them? A lot of the forest owners will may well just put them in the bottom drawer because they need them when they cut down their trees, so they may not be available for emitters. But who knows? Some of them may think, well, the same clowns who presided over a crash in the price once will do it again and therefore sell into any rally, you know. So the government really needs to survey the owners of these 140 million units and get some feel for their intentions going forward. And so, sorry, to your other question about the idea of reopening the scheme to international units, which is one of the questions in the review, is daft. You know, they should drive that thought from their mind with blows and curses. You know, just park it for at least until the next 5-year review. There's so much uncertainty about what international carbon trading will look like that to reintroduce all of that again would be, I think, just folly.
So what I think you seem to be saying, Brian, is that you know, we need to get some sort of minimum price back into the emissions trading scheme. I mean, do you have any feel on what sort of price we should be aiming for?
I think I don't know what it should be, but I think the people you should ask to get a feel for that are forest owners, because one of the crucial things that the ETS is supposed to do is take money from consumers of fossil fuels and send it to the forestry sector, because one of the useful, perhaps the most useful thing that New Zealand can do to reduce its emissions, net effect on global greenhouse gas levels, is to have an expanding forest estate. We did briefly, when the ETS first came in and the carbon price was around $20, not 20 cents, see net afforestation happening.
So people were planting trees.
Because the price made it worthwhile. But I mean, clearly there are other factors in that decision. It's a long-term investment. People have to take a view not only of carbon prices, but of log prices and the opportunity cost of the land, what other things it might be used for. So it's probably hard to be dogmatic about it. But, you know, it shouldn't be impossible to get a feel for that. But given the experience of the last few years and how completely screwed, you know, the forestry sector has been, some sort of minimum price, some floor price, I think is essential.
To get some confidence back into the sector, Now, there's a lot of people out there who hate pine trees though, Brian. What do you say to them?
Well, you know, it's a major industry. It's a major potential source of biofuels, by the way. You know, we only have so many industries in which we are sort of globally competitive, and that's one, you know. So, you know, I see it as a subset of agriculture. It's a crop, and I don't share the prejudice against it.
And if you're into mountain biking, you can go mountain biking in them too.
Well, I suppose,
Great, thanks very much, Brian Fallow, for coming in for our first face-to-face session. Tell us what you think of this new format, and comment as usual on Facebook and on Gareth's World. Cheers, Brian.
Okay,
that's great.
Oh, excellent. That was easy.